The US-China trade war. We've all seen the headlines, right? But what if the story we're constantly told is based on a fundamental misdiagnosis? Well, today, we're diving into a really groundbreaking book chapter by KANBİR that gives us a completely new way to understand this conflict. For any academics, researchers, or journalists tuned in, this is for you. We're going to break down its key contributions to the literature and explain why it really challenges 50 years of economic orthodoxy.
Okay, so let's jump right in by challenging that popular narrative you've probably heard a million times.
You know the story. The massive trade deficit with China is the core economic disease that's plaguing the United States. It's a simple, pretty compelling story about lost jobs and unfair competition.
But what if that's a total misdiagnosis? What if that deficit is only a symptom of a much deeper, more complex, and here's the key, a fundamentally internal issue within the U.S. economy itself?
And this quote? This is the central thesis. It's the chapter's first huge contribution. It completely reframes the debate. The argument is we've been so focused on treating a symptom, not the underlying illness. And that's a critical distinction because it shifts the cause from something external to something internal.
So, if the trade deficit is just a symptom, what's the real disease? This is where the analysis introduces its most innovative and, frankly, most important theoretical contribution. You can see the core intellectual shift right here. The conventional view, the one you hear in political debates, points the finger at external factors, especially China. But KANBİR's contribution flips that script entirely. It turns the focus inward to a chronic internal American paradox, and that just fundamentally alters the whole argument.
So the chapter identifies this core weakness as the low savings/low investment paradox. Now, this isn't something new. It's a structural flaw that's been developing for half a century, long before the trade war was ever in the headlines.
And how has this been possible for so long? Well, this weakness has been enabled and, kind of masked for 50 years by what's known as the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. The chapter's second key contribution is showing how this privilege became a kind of sweet poison, eroding the very foundations of the US economy from the inside out.
Just look at this data. It's really striking. It reveals a dramatic long-term decline. Adjusted net savings, they just plummeted from over 10% back in the 70s to under 5% recently. It even dipped into negative territory in 2008. And what's maybe even more alarming is that net investment has been hovering near zero for decades. This shows, with hard data, how the dollar's privilege has undermined savings and investment discipline for half a century.
Okay, so now let's follow the data trail. Let's look at the empirical evidence the chapter uses to prove why protectionist policies are basically the wrong medicine for this misdiagnosed illness.
And here's the crucial point. Based on the very latest data, the tariffs aimed at China, they completely failed to solve the fundamental problem. They just shuffled the deficit around.
This right here illustrates what economists call trade diversion, and it's a huge empirical contribution of this chapter. Sure, the deficit with China shrank, but look what happened with the EU and Mexico. Those deficits exploded. And the bottom line, it's just staggering. The total US trade deficit actually got worse by over $450 billion.
Just let that number sink in for a second. The deficit with Mexico alone surged by over $111 billion. Using up-to-date 2024 data like this provides some of the first real empirical proof that protectionism didn't cure the deficit. It just moved it around. And in the end, it actually made the overall problem bigger.
So now let's dig into how this analysis builds a really powerful, unified theory of where the trade war came from. And this is another really significant contribution to the field.
A key academic innovation here is that it brings together three major economic theories into a single, clear causal chain. It connects the dots. It starts with the dollar's dominance, which pulls in tons of foreign capital. Step 2, that foreign money enables high consumption, not high savings. And step 3, all that money going to consumption starves the economy of real investment, which erodes the country's productive capacity. It's a comprehensive model where others just saw isolated pieces of a puzzle.
So this analysis reframes the trade war not as some recent political squabble, but as the inevitable symptom of a 50-year structural crisis. That's a huge shift from a short-term political view to a long-term, macro-historical perspective on how global capitalism has evolved.
And this timeline just lays it all out. The problem isn't new. You can trace its roots all the way back to the 1970s. It shows this long-term transformation where each big event, from the end of Bretton Woods to China joining the WTO to the 2008 financial crisis, just kept pushing the system closer and closer to the conflict we see today.
So why does all this matter? Why is this new diagnosis so important? What's the big takeaway for researchers and policymakers?
So KANBİR's work is really a landmark academic contribution for these three reasons. First, it offers a new unified theory centered on an internal crisis. Second, it backs it up with deep empirical proof, using data all the way up to 2024. And third, it delivers this devastating critique of current policy, showing that tariffs are fundamentally misguided because they're treating the wrong disease. And it so powerfully flips Treasury Secretary John Connolly's famous boast from 1971 on its head. The chapter argues that America's greatest economic privilege, the dollar, has actually become a source of its own structural weakness. It's not just their problem anymore.
Ultimately, this analysis leaves us with a really critical and provocative question for the future of the entire global economy. By diagnosing the illness as internal, it forces us to reconsider not just trade policy, but the very foundation of the dollar-centric system that has governed the world for over 50 years.